This is Tattoo Medical number 3, part 3 of this series. This is my third video on Tattoo Medical, 3 things I did not tell you in the previous 2 videos. At the end, after about 4.5 minutes, part 2 will continue. These are the observations of the author only and do not construe medical advice or recommendations for treatment. If you're considering getting a tattoo but are worried about the toxic ink going into your lymph nodes and liver, please consider this. The 3 points that I'm about to make on this video. Autopsy study has showed that tattooed patrons who died 14 years earlier than those who did not have tattoos. So tattoos lead to earlier death apparently from this study. Although this was an observational and limited study, it has something to consider. Do the tattoos lead to the earlier death, or is it a observation unaffected by the actual ink in the tattoo? It is not a cause and effect. This may be due to, for example, lifestyle differences in those who are tattooed and those who are not. Or it could be due to the toxic and carcinogenic effects of the inks. The absolute conclusion was not reached in this study, and again, it was just an observational study. So tattoo, inking poison, symptoms, treatment, prevention have been gone into. Spreading to the lymph nodes and liver. Is tattoo ink safe? Tattoos can increase the risk of cancer according to a 2013 study. Scientists found that tattoo inks contain cancer-causing chemicals. So if you want to remove the toxic effects of the ink, you should not consider laser removal. The laser only breaks up the ink and increases the spread. It does not actually remove the ink. So by spreading the ink to your liver and lymph nodes, this may make things worse. This could increase the spread to the lymph nodes and the liver, and obviously if the ink is carcinogenic, this could increase the risk of lymphomas and other types of cancer. Unless you just want the tattoo gone and you are not worried about the toxins, you can just use the laser removal. But to remove the toxic ink, it has to actually be cut out of your body. This is called the excision method or the surgical method, non-laser, and there's 2 types of that. The first one is hopefully it is able to be cut out. It's either small enough or in the right area that can be surgically excised or removed, cut out with a scalpel and scissors. And if a tattoo is too big, it might be better off just to leave it alone rather than using the laser, which is more likely to spread it. The other option is deep dermabrasion, is another way of removing all of the ink that's in the tattoo. It will not remove the ink that has spread, though. The lymph nodes would have to be removed to do this. Okay, here I will show you part B, video number 2. And this video is strictly the observations of me, the author, and do not recommend medical treatment. This is a lymph node that was taken from someone who had a tattoo, and you can see the ink has migrated and diffused into that lymph node. And this is the truth, toxic truth about tattoos. Here again are some biopsied lymph nodes that shows large amounts of black ink within the lymph node. These are taken up by the macrophages and deposited in the lymph node. Here's some more lymph nodes taken from people who have had tattoos, and this is in the drainage system of the tattoo, and the ink ends up in the lymph node. The ink is taken up by the white blood cells called macrophages and taken into the lymph node and then eventually passed on to the liver. There's many more lymph nodes that show staining from the tattoo ink. So the ink does migrate through the body by this. Here's a tattoo kinetics diagram. Shows the ink being injected into the skin. The macrophages, those white blood cells, go by active transport down to the lymph nodes. And here's the ink going into the lymph nodes. There's multiple lymph nodes there on this biopsy under the microscope, and you can see the black ink within the lymph nodes. Even more examples. Here's a lymph node with some fat cells, the big vacuoles that you can see, but then you also see the black ink being taken up into the lymph node. More examples. There's many, many more examples available, but again, the black ink taken up into the lymph nodes by the white blood cells, usually the macrophages. And here we can see example under the microscope of lymph node biopsy on the top and the microscopic cells on the bottom full of ink. There's the tattoo. There's underneath that's the lymph nodes that are draining the system there from the tattoo. And the third is the histology of the ink inside the lymph nodes. Another photograph and discussion of the ink within the lymph nodes. So this is called tattoo ink poisoning, symptoms, prevention, and treatment. Prevention obviously is not to get the tattoos. Don't inject foreign materials into oneself. Is tattoo ink safe? No, it is not. Increased risk of cancer. Tattoos contain cancer-causing chemicals from the inks. And can tattoos make lymph nodes swell and become cancerous? Yes, that's potentially a problem. Do the tattoos resemble lymphomas? And yes, they are often cause swelling of the lymph nodes, and they can mimic a lymphoma, and I've seen this many times. So again, the tattoo drains into the lymph node. The tattoo ink may be carcinogenic. Here's a 15-year-old tattoo that caused a cancer-like reaction in a patient. This is the story in the medical literature. And there are numerous chemicals that are carcinogenic within numerous tattoo dyes. And here are some of them listed here. So how toxic are tattoos? And they can contain lead, cadmium, chromium, nickel, and thallium, all which are known to cause cancer. So they also contain the azochemicals in orange, brown, yellow, green, and violet dyes that are used in the tattoos, and these are also carcinogenic. So here's a list of the carcinogenic and toxic chemicals that are in the specific tattoo inks, and you can look at that in more detail if you'd like. There's also aluminum, benzene, cadmium, and cobalt, ferric hydrate, and other toxic materials that are making up the tattoo inks. So is a tattoo carcinogenic? I would say in my experience it is. The ink definitely drains into the lymph nodes, and they resemble lymphomas and possibly other types of carcinomas or cancers. So the toxic truth about tattoos: You should consider a tattoo strongly before you get one, and the toxic reactions. None of the inks have been proven to be totally harmless, and prevention again is to not get the tattoo. Then there is the religious consequences possibly. So here, this tattoo is rather ironic, and this is from Leviticus 19:28. And here's a repeat of that, Leviticus 19:28, and that one should not religiously consider tattooing themselves. I will now replay the video from
Yes,
part
hello.
1.
Hope you're having a good day. I am here out in the virgin forest. Actually, it's a 100-year forest. Was clear cut almost exactly 100 years ago. Today, I am discussing my interpretation of tattoos, the medical consequences, although I'm not supposed to, by YouTube standards, make medical recommendations. So I'm not making any medical recommendation. I'm just giving my thoughts on the medical consequences of getting tattooed and what that means and what I've seen from my experience. So no actual condemnation of them or recommendation to either get them or remove them or not get them at all, but maybe you'll surmise my gist of that throughout listening to my lecture here. Okay, so I've been practicing medicine almost 40 years, including medical school, residency, fellowship, and then in public health and then private practice. I worked for almost 25 years at Martin Luther King Hospital in the county of Los Angeles in the emergency department, and was residency director for a while. I was vice chairman for a while, and all of that involved taking care of patients, probably at least 100,000 patients in the emergency department at those county hospitals as well as in private practice. And I have to say there was a lot of stab wounds and gunshot wounds, so there was a lot of trauma involved and repairing those injuries, investigating those injuries. So a lot of slicing with gunshot wounds and trying to repair the wounds, inspecting the wounds, looking inside to see the damage. Anyway, a lot of the patients had tattoos, and at that time, early on, around 45 years ago, I first noticed that when there was a laceration, deep laceration down to the lymph nodes, lymphatic tissue, all the lymph glands were colored, and it was unusual, and I immediately figured that that was due to the tattoos and the dyes from the tattoos draining into the lymphatic system and then into the lymph nodes and then further on into the liver eventually. So my impression at that time was whatever this ink was made out of was getting into the body, into the lymphatic system, and that was probably not a good thing, especially if there were, for example, carcinogens in the ink. If there were toxic chemicals in the ink, then yes, that would have been probably not a good thing. Okay, again, no medical recommendations, but please check out what's in the inks, and I will give some slide presentation on this later on in this lecture. But if you think of colored materials are often heavy metals, and each heavy metal has a specific color, you can imagine what these inks are made out of. And I believe they still are to this day. And the primitive inks were usually heavy metals as well. So I remember the big thing about Elizabeth I. Remember, she had the white face from all the makeup. Anyway, that was a lead-based tint that she had on her face. Obviously extremely toxic over time, and I believe she probably paid the price for that eventually. Now, if you get a tattoo and it drains into your lymphatic system, it can enlarge those lymph nodes. Apparently the macrophages, which are large white blood cells, gather up the ink material, trying to get rid of it for the body, and in doing so can also take it into the lymph nodes, and then from there can spread through the lymph channels back eventually to the liver. And it's also been noted to have heavy metals and the toxic materials from ink in the liver. So what has this done? Initially, I started biopsying some of the swollen lymph nodes when I would see them after, for example, a stab wound, before suturing it up or on investigation. And they would come back as possible or pseudo lymphoma, which means that it looked like lymphoma or cancer cells, but was not exactly. So, I mean, how do you tell the difference between something that looks like lymphoma and something that actually is lymphoma? It's very, very difficult. And even if it looks like lymphoma and they don't call it lymphoma, is it on the way to lymphoma? Again, once you have a tattoo, you cannot really get rid of it. Even removing it through lasers or whatever does not get rid of it, and the inks may even make it worse. It breaks up the inks and goes into the lymphatic system in even higher concentrations, most probably. So anyway, heavy metals and the other materials in the inks, many are considered carcinogenic. Many of the heavy metals, such as mercury, lead, arsenic, cadmium, etc., are heavy metals that are known to cause cancer. And also some of the other materials that go into making the ink and the dyes many dyes are also carcinogenic. Now, if you want to look this up, look up Prop 65, State of California will list the chemicals they consider that do and have been proven to the state of California to cause cancer. And many of these inks and heavy metals in the inks and dyes are considered carcinogenic, proven to cause cancer by the state of California. So anyway, in conclusion, I'm not telling you not to get a tattoo. It's up to you. It's a free world, free country. You're allowed to get them. It's not against the law, but maybe you can surmise from my lecture here that I personally would not get one, and I personally would not recommend my friends get one, even one, because they all drain eventually to the lymph nodes and cause lymph swelling and end up with dyes and inks and heavy metals in the lymph nodes and then eventually in the liver. Now, one other thing that I must point out about tattoos is there's a recent study came out that people with tattoos have a life expectancy at least 14 years less than people without tattoos. So that's significant. The other thing I'd like to point out is that many people do have tattoos, and it's a common thing to get tattoos. And apparently in some countries such as this one, approximately 25% of people have tattoos. So it's a very common thing. Unfortunately, cancer takes a long time to develop, and if you get a tattoo, it may be, many, many years before cancer develops. By that time, it's too late to obviously reverse the process. And again, my recommendation, even though it's not a medical recommendation, because we're on YouTube and I'm not supposed to make medical recommendations because they're all considered misinformation, but I personally would not get one. Now, there's also the religious consequences, which I won't discuss here. Some people think they look good. I personally don't really like them. But anyway, there's a high rate, especially in prison. Most of the inmates have tattoos. So, signing out. Thank you. Have a good life. Try not to get a tattoo if you can avoid it. My personal opinion and not a medical recommendation, because this is YouTube. Okay, if you want to see my other medical information, please look on other venues for my videos on medical diagnoses, treatment, etc., and personal recommendations. Okay, thank you. Have a good day. Have a good life. Signing out from this magnificent virgin forest in the Golden Ears Park in British Columbia, Canada. And the air is fairly fresh. It's a busy day in the middle of summer. Extreme fire hazard, but there's no fires close to me. I'm by the road. I can escape rapidly if need be. Lots of cars going by, unfortunately, and I hope they did not disturb you. Okay, again, have a good day, have a good life. Signing out for now. And listen to the rest of the lecture. I will have some slides and further discussion. Thank you.
So in summary, this is a free world and you have the right to choose to get a tattoo or not. I'm just giving you something to consider. These are my own personal observations. You are not obligated to follow me, and this is not to be considered as medical advice. Thank you for your support, and have a good life. Have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your video. To subscribe to my channel, please press on my caricature. And these are some of my awards and textbooks I've written. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Have a good life.